It's now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Kate Slack. Kate is almost certainly well known to many of you as the head gardener at Marble Hill. And if you visit the park, you are certainly very familiar with the fantastic work that she and her volunteers are doing there to restore the pleasure gardens. It's certainly a dramatic and a much welcome improvement, I think. So without much further ado, Kate, I hand over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the talk about the restoration of the gardens at Marble Hill. I'm not a garden historian. I am very definitely a gardener, so I'm talking about the restoration from the gardener's point of view, and really about how we went about it, how we did it, and photos of before and after. I'm just going to share my screen. The project was called Marble Hill Revived Project, and it was very much what we've been doing over the last couple of years. This is a survey which is attributed to James Dorrit, and it is really the plan that we've been trying to restore the gardens to as faithfully as possible. And we have really kept as closely to this as we possibly can. The main area is the 4 quarters of the gardens surrounding the house. So there is what we're calling the northeast quarter, the northwest quarter. I hope you can see my cursor. The southwest quarter and the southeast quarter. We did find this a bit too complicated, so we are calling it after the main features in those quarters, which I'll talk about later. But you can see from this plan that the view down to the river was framed by the trees. So we have these tree avenues running down to the river, which frame the view, and the gardens were split into very definite separate woodland quarters, which really give it quite an interesting feel, because each quarter very much has its own different character. There was also the main lawn, which is the oval lawn, which you can see in the middle here, and different features in each quarter, which give it a very different individual feel. So if we go into the next slide, you can see from an aerial view of Marble Hill Park that the main bones of the gardens, the pleasure gardens, were still very much there. You can see the house in the centre, and you can see the house in the centre on the plan. The 4 quarters of the woodland were still very much there, with some of the features. So the ice house still remains. We found the base of the 9-pin bowling alley, which is down here. The grotto still remains, which is here, and the path in front of the house remains. And actually you can see from this that the oval lawn really still remained very much to this day. In the photograph, the trees are growing over the oval lawn, but it still was very much an oval lawn, which you'll see in some later photographs that really frames the house. So these are the pleasure grounds. If you see the house, the top grey box, so to the north of that is Richmond Road, and to the south of it is the river, and it runs all the way down to the river. And these were the landscape architect plans which we were working from and are still working from, and they're very much distinct, and also very, very faithfully restoring them back to the plan that I've just shown you. The tree avenues, so this is a print by an unknown artist of Marble Hill House in 1780, and you can see the tree avenues at the time. They look slightly odd to us today because the trees almost look like lollipop trees, but it was the fashion of the day to take the lower limbs off and make very long trunks, which make them look a bit like lollipop trees to us. And we wouldn't be doing that today because it looks very unnatural to us, but it was the fashion of the day, and that's what they thought made beautiful trees. but it's evidence that those avenues existed at the time and framed Marble Hill Park. But all the way through this restoration, it is a balance between restoring them as faithfully as possible as we can to Henrietta's time, but also trying to make them pleasing to the modern eye. So the first avenue of trees which we're planting, and they are planted today, is Aesculus indica. There's evidence and literary evidence that the first avenue of trees in Henrietta's time would have been horse chestnut. We can't plant those today because those horse chestnut are very prone to a bacteria, a canker, which causes the limbs to drop. They're also very prone to leaf miner, so you might see these days that horse chestnut tend to go brown very early in the summer, and that's due to a leaf miner that basically gets into the leaves and burrows through the leaves and makes them brown. So it wasn't really safe to plant horse chestnuts. So we've planted instead of that Aesculus indica, which is similar to our horse chestnut. It's from the Himalayas. It's a really elegant tree, as you can see. This is a tree outside the orangery at Kew. It still has those lovely pink candelabra flowers. It's slightly smaller than horse chestnut, but it has much more elegant leaves, and it still has that lovely habit to it. So in years to come, you'll have this beautiful avenue of the Aesculus indica running down to the river with the lovely pink candelabra flowers. The next avenue of trees that we're planting is black poplar. Black poplar used to be very, very common in the UK. It grows on floodplains, and it's really quite a handsome tree. It lives for a long time. The oldest black poplar in the country is actually at Strawberry Hill Gardens. So if you go there, you can see the oldest black poplar in the country. But it's also been identified now as Britain's rarest tree, which is tragic because it was so common and it was used for lots of different reasons. They found timbers of black poplar on the Mary Rose. It's very much in evidence in a lot of the Constable paintings. So if you see the picture in the bottom right-hand corner, these trees are actually black poplars, and it was so common and used a lot for things from floorboards to arrowheads, but it dropped out of fashion as they found faster growing hybrid poplars, and then they started to be cut down because some of the seed heads can be slightly irritating. But it's very, very important to a lot of moths as well, and it's very important that we try and keep this tree alive. We only have a very one strain of tree, so it doesn't make it very resistant. So there is a project looking at the different strains of trees in the country and seeing if we can find different strains to try and make it more resistant. It's a beautiful tree, and the next avenue of trees that we're planting is white poplar. This is quite a magical tree. It has silver underside to the leaves, and in the distance you can see them shimmering, so it looks very silvery. And it has, the seed pods are white, so it often looks like it snowed on the ground when the seed pods drop. It's been a lovely tree for our nursery on site. The children were involved in planting some of the trees, and they've named the tree Snowy, and they come back to see the tree. So it's a really nice selection of trees that have been chosen, with the black poplar, the white poplar, and the Aesculus indica. And even now you can see the difference in them. If you go down to the river, you can see how different the trees are, and it will make a stunning effect when the trees are mature. These are the avenues, some of the avenues of trees that have been planted. So in the foreground are the white poplars. You can see how silvery they look. And in the future, with the hot summers that we're getting, they'll provide a lot of shade for people who are picnicking in that area. You can already see some of the shade that they're casting, and it's going to be more and more important the hotter summers we get. You can see someone is actually lying out sunbathing and has missed the shade, but the more they the bigger these trees get, the more you'll be able to see the difference between the silvery white poplars, the black poplars, and then the beautiful, elegant foliage of the Aesculus indica. So I'm afraid this isn't a very good slide, but it just gives you a bit more of a view of the woodland quarters that has been the main focus of myself and the volunteers' work. So this is what we're calling the orchard quarter, and these are the plans, the landscape architect plans that we're working from. So the back areas of the beds are planted up with native shrubs, so things like hawthorn, hazel, dogwood, Gelder Rose, and these will eventually provide a thick thicket, which will be fantastic for wildlife, because a lot of the plants that we're planting flower heavily, but they also produce berries. So it will produce flowers, which produces nectar and pollen for pollinators, but then in the autumn we'll have berries for birds and small mammals. The front half of it is planted up with a stone fruit orchard. So we've planted things like cherries, damsons, greengages and plums. The reason why we chose stone fruit is because it will be quite shady in this area, and stone fruit are better at dealing with shade than apples and pears would be. They're producing a lovely blossom already, so some of the cherries are producing really lovely white blossom. If you go down there, you'll see them in flower now. The grass around the orchard is a wildflower meadow, and it's been seeded. It was seeded last spring, actually, and it's a very heavily flowering wildflower mix. And the idea is that people will be able to enter through the gates here, and we'll have cut paths through the wildflower meadows. So you'll be able to wander through the orchard and the wildflower meadows and out this side. So it will be a really beautiful, especially in spring, you'll have the blossom from the orchard in spring, and then in the summer you'll have the flowers from the wildflower meadows. So this is the orchard quarter, and this was one of the first ones that we started on. The bottom left-hand photograph is our first community volunteering day, and they started clearing the ivy, and it was quite an incredible job. I cannot give the volunteers enough credit, because they literally have spent months and months and months clearing ivy by hand, and it was quite a major job, it really was. But they never complained, just got on with it and cleared tons and tons of ivy. The top right-hand photo that I've shown you is it's a hornbeam, and it's a really beautiful specimen of a hornbeam tree, which is on the corner. And it's so nice now that it's cleared, you can actually see the tree. It makes a beautiful specimen tree in that quarter. The woodlands were surrounded by this chestnut paling, which was quite ugly, tended to get kicked in. People used to kick it in to let the dogs out. It was very rickety and quite ugly, and didn't really do anything for the woodland quarters. The bottom right-hand picture is from basically by the house. So you can see this is basically laurel, which wasn't particularly attractive and wasn't doing anything. So those are the pictures of the orchard quarter before we started clear. So this was us starting to plant up the plants that arrived. The top left-hand photograph is the first consignment of plants that arrived, which was a very exciting day for us all. So we had bare root whips on the right hand. We had thousands and thousands of them. We have loads of ferns and lots of evergreen shrubs at the back. So we were all very excited about those arriving. The bottom left-hand photograph was the first day we started planting with the volunteers, and these are our Tuesday group. I think there's Ruth and Bamba and Jack there. So this was quite a historic moment. We started planting, and they're planting dogwood there. You can see how it's the first day planting, because the planting boards that they're standing on are absolutely pristine. and clearly haven't been used before, but they definitely don't look like that now. And then the bottom right hand photo is the Wildflower Meadow area, and when we looked at it like that, I did feel like this is just never going to happen, but it did. It was quite a feat, but we managed it. And you can see in the top right hand photograph, this is our Wednesday group, and they were involved in planting the orchard. We had to plant the orchard later than expected because in March we went down into lockdown and all the volunteers had to be finished, and Jack had to be furloughed. So a lot of the work that we did had to be delayed until this year or last year, and when everybody came back and we could start planting again. So this is the orchard quarter when it was cleared. The top left-hand photo, you can see that the orchard and the Wildflower Meadow is being divided from the strip by the path, and this is a yew hedge which runs all the way along the length of the orchard. And the idea is that this yew hedge will be a very clean cut, formal yew hedge, which will give a lovely vista running down right past the front of the house. The strips of grass have now been seeded, and the trees that have been planted are elms. It's a disease-resistant elm because, as you probably know, we get Dutch elm disease in this country, but there are disease-resistant varieties which we're using. We're reinstating elms back into Marble Hill Park because historically there were a lot of elms there, and they are a beautiful tree, and were very common in the English landscape, but because of Dutch elm disease they no longer are. But now that we're reintroducing these disease-resistant varieties, hopefully they will come into the landscape again. The bottom photograph is just before we seeded the Wildflower Meadow, and the top right-hand photograph is the back beds. So these were topped up with lots of topsoils in order to plant all of the plants that we had. And this is the Wildflower Meadow. So it was a real success. It was great to see it so full of flowers this summer. And at some point I really did doubt whether it would seed very well because we had such a dry summer. But we left it, we didn't water it. It's very important not to water it because once you water it, the seeds germinate and you have to keep on watering. So they did start to germinate around May, June, and this picture is from August, the bottom, and you can see that it was full of mallows and oxeye daisies. It was really, really successful. I was very pleased with it. The top left-hand photograph is a photograph of our horticultural apprentice, Jack. We cut the meadow fairly early, so we cut it around August time. And that was so that the grass and the flowers really put their energy into putting down the roots rather than flowering. And it was heartbreaking to cut it at that time because the flowers were just absolutely stunning. But we had to be ruthless just so that we can establish the meadow and really get it going for the future. The machine that Jack is using is basically a mechanical scythe. It's a bit like a hedge trimmer, but a horizontal one, and it goes along and it cuts the meadow from the very, very base, which is important. We couldn't use a strimmer because if you use a strimmer, it throws the grass cuttings all over the place. And the idea is to remove as much as that top growth as you can because we're taking away the fertility and the flowers that grow in the wildflower meadows like low fertile soil. So it's really important to cut it as low down at the base as you can and remove as much as that top growth as you can. This is where scything basically was used for wildflower meadows. The top right hand photo is a picture of the orchard once it was planted and the meadow was cut. It's coming along really well. The orchard's flowering, and we gave the grass its last cut a couple of weeks ago, and then we'll leave it until the end of summer and cut it. So it will hopefully be as floriferous, I can't say it, full of flowers as it was this summer. The bottom right-hand photograph is a photograph from the scaffolding which Rachel took, and it's a really good photo because you can see both the orchard quarter and you can see these formal strips of grass and the elm trees. So you can see how it's going to make a really lovely formal entrance to the house when the trees grow and the turf takes hold. So onto the ice house quarter. This quarter again was surrounded by chestnut palings. You used to be able to get into see to the entrance to the ice house from outside the quarters, and it was quite a thick quarter. This it was full of lots of saplings of sycamore and self-seeded things like robinia. This is the landscape architect's plan, and it has 3 entrances to the woodlands here. So you'll be able to enter from the side of the house, you'll be able to walk through the woodland, and there's a curving path that curves into the door of the ice house. This is one of, I love all of the quarters of the woodlands, but this is one of my favourite. It really does have a feel of a woodland dell, and it's very dappled sunlight as you walk through. We've planted the same plants, so lots of hawthorn, lots of hazel, dogwood, and Gelder Rose. So it will still achieve the same effect as the orchard quarter. You'll have lots of flowering shrubs in the summer and lots of berries in the autumn. You can then wander through to the front of this quarter, and this has been planted up with rows of lime trees. The reason why we chose lime trees is, even though historically it might have been oak, we can't plant too many oaks in the park because of oak processionary moth, and we do have problems in this area of London with that, and it's just too dangerous really for people to have too many oaks at the moment. But we are reinstating these avenues of limes in there, and the Wildflower Meadow in this area is, again, it's more of a grassy mix because it needs to tolerate shade, but it will have quite a lot of different flowers in it as well. The bottom left-hand corner, you can see these larger circles are lime trees again. So the idea here is we're reinstating the avenue, the vista, which would have run down from the ice house down to the river. And there will be a bench here, an ice house seat, where people can sit and look down this vista down to the river. This is a picture of our Tuesday group, and this was clearing some of the roots in the ice house quarter, and this was a really big job. We dug out roots of laurel, and it was quite a phenomenal job that they did. And all the way through, it has been basically digging out roots and clearing ivy, and really very back-breaking work. And this is the ice house today, so you can see how much clearer it is. The wildflower seed took really well in this quarter as well. It's not as colourful as the orchard quarter, but the idea again is to mow paths around the trees so that people can wander through the wildflower meadows and wander through the back into the woodland area. You might notice the big stand of dead trees. So we've left these old oak trees, which were the original ones from Henrietta's time, but they're particularly good for wildlife. So bats roost in them. And today when I was in there, one of my volunteers, who's our bird expert, Diane, spotted a tree creeper, and the tree creeper basically was going under the old bark, and it must have a nest under there. So it's really, really good for wildlife to leave these old stands of trees. And to me, they just look like sculptures. They really are iconic, and they are the remaining stands of some trees from Henrietta's time, so they're really, really important. And this is inside the ice house quarter. So you can see the top left-hand photograph. The ice house was basically too steep for us to plant. So what we had to do is terrace it with logs that we would use from the woodland that we'd cut down. And this is quite a big job. You can see Andy, our volunteer, who was basically one of the architects of the terracing. And it was a way of allowing us to plant, but without the soil and mulch rolling down. And actually it's made a real feature of the mound. If you see on the right, top right-hand photo, it looks lovely and it makes a real feature of it. It's been planted up with evergreen shrubs, so things like laurel, butcher's broom, ruscus, and ferns. And eventually it will grow into one big, colourful evergreen mound. And then the idea is you won't be able to see the ice house door. As you come round the corner of the path, you'll discover the door of the ice house. You can see again on the left-hand, bottom left-hand photograph, the terracing and the ice house door. The middle photograph is two of our volunteers, Raphael and Ruth, and they did a fantastic job of creating a really straight path through the woodland. And I think it really will be very magical. You will follow this path through the woodland, the dappled shade, round the corner and to the door of the ice house. So these are some photos of some of the plants that we're planting. The top photograph with the white flower is Privet. Privet's a very underrated plant. It's very, very good for wildlife, and it's basically bomb-proof, which is why it was always used for hedges, but especially in towns and cities. It's very pollution tolerant, but it's also very good for wildlife. It provides a lot of pollen and nectar for wildlife, and it provides berries, blackberries, in the autumn. The next photograph down is an unusual plant. It's quite difficult to get hold of, actually. It's the Pleuro fruticosum. I can't say it, the Pleuro fruticosum. It's a lovely umbellifera shrub, and it has yellow umbelliferal flowers. And again, it's going to provide a really nice structure and colour in those beds. The right-hand top photograph is ruscus, which you might notice I keep talking about. It's butcher's broom, and there was a lot of ruscus in those woodlands when we started clearing them. We took them all out and we're reusing it all in the woodlands. It's a very interesting plant. It used to be called butcher's broom because butchers used to use it to clean their chopping boards. It's quite spiky, so you can scrub with it, but it has been discovered to have antibacterial properties. So it will actually clean the chopping board and disinfect it. The two bottom photographs are the Gelder Rose, which is Viburnum opulus. This is a native plant, and if you're ever in a woodland where you see it, there's a sign that it probably is an ancient woodland. It provides these white hydrangea-like flowers, which provide pollen and nectar for insects, but then it provides these lovely red glowing berries as well in autumn for birds. This is the flower garden quarter. This has quite a different feel to the other quarters. Historically, this is what Henrietta would have had there, and we've tried to restore it as faithfully as we can to what it would have looked like in Henrietta's time. The bottom half of these quarters have been left not being interfered with, so the idea is that we leave these quarters for wildlife until the thickets in the other areas get established, so that it provides habitat for wildlife, so they have some kind of refuge to go to, and then once the other woodlands are established, there'll be plenty of thicket and habitat for them to go to. So the top half is the flower garden, and this was the flower garden quarter. I think this quarter was the quarter that was actually used by the public a lot. So a lot of the fences were kicked in There tended to be lots of dogs running through this quarter, so there wasn't a lot of ground cover, but I think that was because it was used a lot by sort of members of the public. It was also really, really invaded with snowberry. So you see the bottom right-hand photograph, this is snowberry, which is on the Richmond invasive species list. And it's quite very difficult to clear. It has runners and they really need digging out quite. And we have one particular volunteer, I'll have to give a shout out to Ruth, who basically took it upon herself to dig out all the snowberry, and it really was a job and a half. You can see how thick it is, but it was really dominating that quarter and stopping anything else from growing in the quarter. And this is from once we'd cleared the quarter, the contractors started building the borders for the flower beds. It was quite a job and a half for them. We had to build up the wood and they had to fill it with topsoil to build up the layer. They also put up this estate railing. So the estate railing that you can see here runs along all the quarters, and it would historically have been the type of railing that would have been used in Henrietta's time. It gives it a really formal feel and really makes the strips look finished. It's a really nice railing. We have put chicken wire up. You might wonder if you go there. And this is to stop dogs getting into those areas and digging up the plants that we've just planted. So that's the reason for the chicken wire. And this is the nearly finished product of the flower beds. This was interesting because the plans that I received for all the other quarters were very prescriptive about what I planted and how I planted it. But the flower bed in the middle, it was just a list of plants, and I had no idea how they wanted it planted. So we had a consultation with an academic at Sheffield who specialises in historic gardens. And he said that basically the middle bit would have been a cone, so it was an evergreen cone, but then from that cone you would have radiating paths coming out, almost like sunburst. And the idea of the paths was for the gardeners to be able to get in and maintain the flower beds. And then the beds between the rays themselves were planted in square blocks, which is quite alien to how we would plant herbaceous plants, especially in this day and age. These days we would plant things in drifts, make them look much more natural. We'd plant them in heights, graduating heights. And he said, no, they wouldn't have been planted in graduating heights. They would basically have just had square blocks planted, because it wouldn't just have been a flower garden. It would also have been a cut flower garden and also for herbs. So the idea, it was a working bed, so the gardeners could get in on the paths. If some of the annual blocks had died out, they could get in and take those out and replace them. So basically it's a constantly changing herbaceous border, which is something that we're not used to these days. We usually plant either perennials or annuals together, but they would have planted a mishmash of them, and it was used for gardens, it was used for cut flowers and for herbs. Around the edge you can see this little hummock of a plant. This is sea thrift, and if you go to Cornwall or Wales, you see this on the cliffs. It's a beautiful little plant, little pink bubbles, and it will be edging the paths on both sides, so it will provide a really pretty path all the way around. So these are some of the plants that we're planting in the flower garden. The top right hand photograph is wallflower. Then we have stocks in the middle. We have antirrhinums, which is snapdragons. The bottom right hand photograph is geranium pretens, which actually is a native geranium. Pretens means of the woods, but it was used. So they would have taken native plants out of the landscape and used them in the gardens. We have pinks in the middle, and the left hand photograph is sea thrift. So as you can see, it's going to be a really pretty flowery garden, full of soft colours, things like pinks and creams and whites and blues. This is the southwest quarter. This quarter we're not doing as much to as the other quarters. So the idea is to leave these enclosed areas for wildlife until the other areas have completely established and provided an alternative habitat for wildlife. We are doing around the edges, so the edges of them is quite formal. We've planted elms in an avenue again, and the public will be able to wander around the edge, so they'll be able to enter from a gate here, walk in a straight line down here and down to the 9-pin bowling alley. So it will provide quite a contrast. You'll be walking through the formal edges, but in the middle will be the wilderness and the wild areas which have been left for wildlife. This is the southwest quarter. So as you can see, the paths that we're using in all of the areas it's called Seedex, and it's kind of a sandy mix, but it sets, so it's quite hard to walk on. Again, it gives it more of an authentic feel rather than using something like tarmac. It's much softer, and the colour will it will get less bright. It's the same path that we've used down Orleans Road, and it's been very popular. It's nice to walk on, it's attractive, and it's easy to maintain. The bottom left-hand photograph is some of the volunteers planting up. So here we're planted in quite formal rows. We've got quite a lot of lilac in this area, privet. So again, it will be quite flowery, but more evergreen. The bottom right photograph is, again, a photograph taken from the scaffolding, and you can see the actual shape of the paths running through it. And you can also get a glimpse of the Hornbeam Arbor. So the Hornbeam Arbor is going to frame the oval lawn and just really define that oval lawn. And these are the Hornbeam Arbors, which will be lovely once they get going. So historically there were Hornbeam Arbors in framing the oval lawn. And the idea was that the ladies of the house could wander down from the house through the shade of these Hornbeam Arbors and then down to the river through the shade of the avenues, because the ladies of the day wanted to avoid the sun. So it allowed people to basically walk down to the river throughout in shade without actually having to go into the sun at any stage. You can see from this photo taken for the scaffolding how the arbor's basically going to frame the view. And I think it's a lovely photograph, this, because you also get a view of the avenues that run down to the river. So the 9-pin bowling alley, the archaeology that was done on the 9-pin bowling alley actually found the base of the original 9-pin bowling alley. It was a very fashionable game at the time. It went out of fashion quite quickly, but we've reinstated it, and it will be something that the public will be able to play. So you'll be able to come along, hire the 9 pins and have a go at the game yourself. It's a bit like balls really in France. It will have a similar surface to balls, and you'll be able to play balls on it if you want. And we've also reinstated the trees, so it will give shade and it will allow 2 separate areas for people to play the game. So this is the grotto. So the grotto was quite a challenge. As you can see, it was mainly evergreen shrubs, and it was quite a dark, dank place, mainly used for antisocial behaviour, and it wasn't very attractive. So part of the project is cutting this down, and we are going to reinstate it, but the archaeologists are going to do their work in July. So we had to cut it down in winter when it wasn't bird breeding season, but it was quite a phenomenal task. It took a lot of sawing. It took weeks and weeks of clearing the area. It was really quite a Herculean task that the volunteers did. On the bottom left-hand photograph is some of our volunteers taking a well-deserved break on some of the greenery that they've removed from it. So if you wonder now, if you go to Marble Hill, why there's these cut-off stalks, it's because we're waiting for the archaeologists to come along in July and do their job. But once that's done, we will be reinstating it. It's going to be quite different to what it is at the moment. So we think that the walls of the grotto actually were more out, like wings. And in Henrietta's time, the paths would have wound around into the entrance of the grotto. So if you can see on this plan, you can see my cursor, this is a grotto here, and you would have been able to enter from a number of different locations in the gardens, and there were curving, winding paths which would have gone down into the entrance of the grotto. Henrietta spent a long time herself plastering on the shells and the coral and all the shiny objects that they could find in the grotto to make it as magical as possible. There is also a poem that talks about visiting the grotto, and they would have planted lots of real scented plants in there. So it was things like honeysuckle, jasmine, orange blossom, and the idea it was a real magical experience entering through these curving paths with the scent of the lovely flowers and entering into the magical grotto, which would have been covered in shells and coral. And lastly, this is the last phase of the project, which we haven't started yet. This will start in autumn of this year, and this is up near White Lodge entrance. It wouldn't have been around in Henrietta's time, but this is a bit of an acknowledgement to the coach house, and the idea is that we plant lots of scented shrubs. So we have things like Daphne, Philadelphus, laburnum, roses, and they'll be planted amongst long wildflower meadows, again with cut grass paths weaving amongst the meadows. And these will be flowering all the way from early spring to late autumn. So the reason why it's called the Sweet Walk is that there will be something scented all the way through from spring to autumn for people to wander through and appreciate the scent and the wildflower meadows. And lastly, I've just left a picture with you of a frosted grass at Marble Hill Park. Again, another photo of Andy's, which I'm very grateful to. Throughout the whole project, I cannot thank the volunteers enough. Really, they have just performed impossible tasks of clearing the grass, clearing the ivy, clearing the snowberry and mulching, and really we could not have done it without them. And yes, it's been an exciting project to be involved in, and hopefully it will be there for generations to come for people to visit and enjoy the gardens as Henrietta did back in her time.
Thanks very much, Kate. That was absolutely marvellous. I must say, it changes your perspective to see these. Obviously, it changes your perspective, but it changes your attitude to the garden too when you can see these photographs from up the scaffolding and get a much stronger sense of the Hornbeam running round to the avenues down to the river. Thanks very much. There are a couple of questions in the chat already, but if people have other things to ask, would you please just put them in? And now Kate has pointed out how important volunteers are to the establishment of the garden. And now I want to introduce Alexandra Madden. Alex is a volunteer at the garden, I think on a Wednesday. She is also a history graduate and a member of the committee of the Friends of Marble Hill, where her fascination with the the past and the stories which unfold through discovery and research are going to be really useful to us as we improve our knowledge of the site going forward. She's also, Alex is also a participant in the English Heritage Shout Out Loud scheme to get more young people involved in volunteering. And I guess, Alex, that's what you're going to talk about now.
Yeah, just share my screen. So yeah, hi, I'm Alex, and I'm a volunteer at Marble Hill, and I absolutely love it. I find it really exciting. I've learned so much. And yeah, so like John said, I am a history graduate. My main focus of things is history, but despite that, working as a gardener has really opened my eyes to a whole other side of history that I hadn't known about before. So when I first met Kate, she gave me a little tour of Marble Hill and the site, and she explained how one of the main objectives that she was doing was having the park being historically accurate as to how it was at Henrietta Howard's time. And so as a history graduate, I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is just what sounds amazing. It's just what I want. So it really like resonated with me and really pushed me to want to be a volunteer, which is always good. But yeah, my gardening knowledge beforehand was very limited, to say the least. But I've learned so much in the time that I've been there, and I now appreciate so much more all the effort that goes into making gardens of houses, and especially parks and ground houses like this, beautiful. It's definitely a lot more work than just planting a few flowers here and there. But yeah, I've also learned more about the history of gardening, which was something that I'd never been, I didn't even know about before. I wasn't aware that that was like a thing. So being able to learn about the history of gardens and garden designs and how that has evolved over time has been really interesting. So when we were double digging at the stables, I discovered the influence of Dutch Baroque gardens on Henrietta Howard and how that style is now being used and incorporated in the current garden design, which I, as a historian, I find just fascinating. Probably most people don't, but I find that really fun. And then, yeah, finally, all the volunteers that I've met and kind of worked with, they've been absolutely lovely. I honestly can't say how amazing they've been. I've met so many different people, all different ages and backgrounds, and they've truly been so welcoming, so kind, so friendly to me, especially in my first few weeks where I was like really nervous trying to find my feet. But yeah, they really have made the whole experience so much more enjoyable. It's been so fun.
Thanks very much, Alex. That's been great. I'm sure, I know Andy Oakley as well. I know that the volunteer team are all hugely enthusiastic about what they're doing. It's a great tribute to the way Kate and English Heritage have encouraged volunteering and brought them on. So there are a couple of questions in the chat. First of all, for you, Kate, we've been asked, will you be having bees which love lime flowers? So you're planting lots of lime trees. Will you be having bees?
We do actually have bees on site. So one of our rangers, John, is a beekeeper, and we have bees in the yard. And he's been doing it for quite a few years. So we have quite a lot. He produces a lot of honey. We won't be able to have them in the gardens just because of the risk. But we do have them in the yard, and they sort of will be able to benefit from all the new flowers in the gardens. So yeah, we do produce Marble Hill honey already. So yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. Well, will you be selling that in the shop in due course, I guess?
Yes, I mean, I would love to have them in the orchard because historically that's where bees would have been kept. But it's a bit too much of a risk, and talking to John, particularly, some hives can be quite aggressive. So it's not really something we could risk with people visiting the gardens.
Yeah, sure. You've planted a lot of hornbeams. How long will it take them to become established? And, will they be coming into their own already this summer?
The Hornbeam Arbors won't, but Hornbeam is a very fast growing tree. It's much more vigorous than beech. So it will probably within the next few years, I'd say those arbors would be basically in the shape that we're hoping to get them into, because they are very fast growing and quite vigorous, especially compared to beech.
Okay, somebody's just commented in the chat that the honey is presently sold at Armstrong's Butcher. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yes.
I shall watch out for that the next time
Yeah.
I'm up there.
I think it says Marble Hill honey on it, so yeah, watch out for it. It's
Oh,
delicious.
fantastic.
I can definitely vouch for it.
Great. How big is the volunteer force already, Kate? And how many people will you be needing, volunteers will you need to look after the grounds later on?
At the moment, I have 30 garden volunteers, but that's including the kitchen garden as well. So we have 10 wonderful kitchen garden volunteers who part of the project is for the kitchen garden to produce food for the cafe. So we're really trying to extend that. So there will be potential for more volunteers. We've had to limit it because of COVID at the moment. I am hoping to open up the programme again and get lots of different volunteering opportunities, from conservation days on Friday to gardening. So potentially, yeah, we will be able to open it up and have a lot more volunteers once we're allowed to do that.
Right. There's a question just come into the chat there about volunteering. Someone's asking, thanks Alex for a really interesting talk, and also asked how can people volunteer? Kate, can you answer that? Or
yes, so to volunteer, you go to the English Heritage website, and if you put in volunteering at Marble Hill, then a link will come up and you can register your interest as a volunteer. I'm hoping to open it up again on the 17th of May, so start recruiting more volunteers, and I'll get basically your registration form sent to me, and I will contact you and arrange a date to meet up and chat and see what we can do.
okay, great. Thanks very much. In due time, the Friends of Marble Hill will also be looking for volunteers for our own purposes, but we'll have more to say about that in due course. Alex, there's a couple of questions we might want to ask you about. What was it actually like? How did you get involved in volunteering? I mean, is it your experience that young people do get involved in volunteering? How did you get in?
Well, so I graduated from uni in July last year, and then had a gap year and obviously couldn't go traveling. So I was sitting at home unemployed, and my mum was getting very annoyed because I was just sitting around doing not a lot. And it was actually one of her friends who was looking on the English Heritage website and saw that they were looking for volunteers at Marble Hill. And so I applied just the way Kate said just now. And yeah, I didn't know anything about gardening beforehand. I think the first time I met her, I think I told her that and was like, I know absolutely nothing. But literally anyone can get involved. You can learn so much. I've learned so much in the past that I've been here. And with regards to getting more young people involved in volunteering, I think that's really important. I think for our gardening role that we do here at the moment, there's quite a lot of physical stuff that's involved. It's definitely not just planting flowers here and there. We've done some backbreaking stuff. So I definitely think more young people should get involved, also because you get to meet loads of different people that you wouldn't normally meet, and interact with loads of different people that you wouldn't normally interact with, like people outside your class circle, age circle, social circle, all that type of things. And so for me, I became a committee member of Friends of Marble Hill through Andy, because I was a volunteer with him on Wednesdays. And so yeah, I would not have been able to be part of the Friends of Marble Hill if I wasn't a gardener at Marble Hill.
I'm not going to give away any secrets, but I was absolutely amazed to find out about half an hour ago just how far you're travelling to come into Marble Hill. It was absolutely amazing. Thanks very much. What's the most surprising thing you've learned so far?
I think it's how interested the public are in what you're doing. I guess because it's like a public park that we're working with here. They're just generally really curious and really interested to know what you're doing. So throughout the day, multiple people of like all ages will come up and ask, oh, why are you digging here? What's the plan for this? Like when you remove all that, like what's going to be planted next? And it's just like general little conversations with people that have been really nice. I think also because of this past year, people haven't been able to speak to people as often as they'd like. So having that opportunity to speak to different people, to discuss what's all the changes that are happening, that has been like really nice, really refreshing. And yeah, it's really touched me how interested people are in the changes that are happening.
And I believe that you got an award or something, did you, from the Shout Out Loud?
I was part of the English Heritage Shout Out Loud scheme, which is to encourage more young people to get involved in volunteering. And they produced an artwork, which I believe is actually going to be at the Marble Hill site, that an artist made of my experiences of volunteering. So I talked to an artist and she kind of created this beautiful 3D model that she then took a photo of myself volunteering at Marble Hill. And I believe that it is going to be available to view at Marble Hill when it opens, which should be absolutely incredible.
That's marvelous. Thanks very much, Alex. Thanks. Well, we've just run a little bit over time now, and so there's no further questions in the chat I can see. So I think I'll draw the evening to a close now. I thank Alex and Kate very, very much for interesting and enthusiastic and informative discussion. Thanks to everyone who asked a question in the chat. And I hope that you'll now go and tell everyone you know about the Friends of Marble Hill as well, and encourage them to join us and to sign up for our newsletter. And so with that, thank you very much and bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.